Yeah, fine.
Started.
And you can start this live streaming also, Dheeraj. Yeah, okay. Namaste to all of you. A very warm welcome to this evening's program. Um, it has been quite a while since we have had a program in English. We have had some programs in Telugu done by our Karimnagar unit, but we've been a little, there's been a while since we have done our English program, essentially because the Unlock Down program was going on. So we thought we will give it a break for some time. But then it has been realized that there are some urgent topics on which we should bring the focus back on. One of that being our Indian economy and things like that. So friends, we are happy to be back again. And as always, we request you to kindly subscribe to our social media assets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also you can share your views. If you want to be part of Pragya Bharati movement, you're most welcome. Today, the program would go something like this. I would request my colleague, Sri Niranjana Charigaru, CA Chartered Accountant from Karimnagar. He is also the president of our Karimnagar unit of Pragya Bharati. He shall introduce Pragya Bharati to those of you who come for the first time. And then I would, Mr. Venkatesh does not need any introduction, but can just do a single one-liner formal introduction of Venkatesh and then leave the floor to him. I will not stand between you and him. After his talk is over, we have Mr. Srinivas with us. He is a finance professional in his own right. He is the joint secretary of the Pragya Bharati State Unit. He would be handling the question answer session. As you all know, he's also the son of Sri V. Ramarao Garu, former governor of Sikkim. And then it will be followed by a vote of thanks by our treasurer, CA Vijay Thotapalli. This time we have kept a protocol where the questions would be, I will request you to kindly direct it only to Mr. Srinivas. He would consolidate it and he will ask on your behalf. Otherwise, what will happen is a lot of people asking, same questions or taking longer time would delay the whole process. So we request you to bear with us. With these few words, I would now ask Sri Niranjana Charigaru to introduce Pragya Bharati to all of
you. Very good evening to all of you. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Pragya Bharati to you, as it is customary for us to provide a brief introduction about Pragya Bharati for the benefit of those of you who are here for the first time. Please allow me to introduce. Pragya Bharati is an international bankers forum founded about 30 years ago here in Hyderabad with the foresight of visionaries like Sri Ram Madhavji, previously National BJP General Secretary and currently with the RSS National Team. Dr. Tripunareni Hanuman Chaudhary Garu, ex-BSNL Chairman and IT Advisor to the combined Andhra Pradesh government. He is currently the Chairman of our Pragya Bharati Telangana State. Sri B.S. Sharma Garu, who has been pharmaceutical professional, and two other gentlemen who are no more among us, Sri Venkati Panduranga Rao and Harihara Sharma Garu. We also are proud that our current Finance Minister, Minister Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman was the General Secretary of Pragya Bharati, with the aim of propagating nationalistic ideas and thoughts, especially to the young minds. Pragya Bharati organizes meetings, workshops, seminars at various institutions. We invite and organize speeches by eminent speakers from different fields to provide awareness on issues related to our nation, heritage, culture, dharma, polity, and of course current issues as well. Outcomes are drafted out and shared with concerned authorities when necessary, and the inputs are always considered positively. Even during the Corona pandemic period, Hyderabad and Karimnagar was conducted more than 250 Zoom conferences. Pragya Bharati brings out an English monthly magazine, Pragya Bharatiya Pragya, which has so much valuable content. Subscription is only rupees 500 for 2 years, very nominal. I request all of you subscribe and support in the good work Pragya Bharati is doing. And also Pragya Bharati identifies eminent personalities who have done an exceptional work in their respective fields, glorifying our nation, Bharat, and honor them with an award, Pragya Puraskar, recognizing their contribution towards the nation. Pragya Bharati is very much active and present on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram as well. Our programs are recorded and live streamed. You can find our uploaded programs on YouTube for view again later and suggest it to your contacts. If you have anything to share or like to work with us, please reach us through email, phone, or even WhatsApp. This is the brief introduction about our organization, Pragya Bharati. Thank you for giving this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you, Charigaru. Thanks a lot for introducing our organization to the distinguished participants today. Friends, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce you, Dr. M.R. Venkatesh, to you. He needs no introduction, and so I'm not going to really introduce him too much on it. He's an author, he's a multifaceted personality, he's a chartered accountant, he's a lawyer, he's a panelist. We see him fighting it out with all the bad guys on TV almost on a daily basis. And don't we love him? You know, he does such a wonderful job with a lot of content and meaning. You know, what he talks has a lot of meaning behind what he talks rather than just cacophony out there. He has been a very successful chartered accountant, and he switched his hats, and now he's practicing law, and he's been doing pretty good as far as law is concerned. He's picking up cases which are fundamental, structural, and you know, which are very essential for our society. We have had the pleasure of hearing him during our first lockdown as well. Later, Mohandas ji, who is on this panel, our treasurer Vijay Thotapalli, Naresh Gelli, who's just joined in, Venkatesh ji, myself, and a few more professionals, we all joined together to form a group called Arth Yagna, and we deliberated upon the challenges that the economy, Indian economy, Bharatiya economy is facing, and we decided to write a letter to the finance minister and to the prime minister. You could, all of you, look it up in the Twitter handle called Arth Yagna. It is still there. We have focused largely, suggestions based on a civilizational experience. Today, Venkatesh ji is going to talk about the civilizational aspects of economy and how the Bharatiya civilization, our value systems, our dharma, all these things are paramount in terms of the way we need to look at our economy. Unfortunately, we inherited, the Western models, thanks to the way Nehru ji looked at it then. It's high time that we change our paradigm from those thought processes to what is uniquely Bharatiya. He is doing extensive research on many of these aspects. He is actually writing a book. It's titled Retaining Balance, the Eternal Way. It's almost in the final stages. He should be announcing a date of release pretty soon, where he focuses on many of these aspects at a civilizational level. I would request all of you to look forward for that book. He'll probably touch base upon a few of the points that he has mentioned in today's talk as well. I would not, I don't have any doubts in the fact that what he comes out with is so thoroughly researched and well-documented narrative. It has both professional content as well as core Bharatiya values in that. And so, friends, we are also proud to have Sri Venkatesh ji among us. And Venkatesh ji, the floor is yours.
digital floor. Okay. Namaste and good evening to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be back in this forum. And when we debated on what should be the topic, it was Giridharji who suggested this. And incidentally, and I would say by a remarkable coincidence, it has been one of the core subjects that I have dealt with in the book, which is the civilizational aspect of running your economy or our economy. So to understand what I intend to say, I'll have to intertwine quite a few subjects, which will include law, philosophy, the ancient wisdom of Mahabharata and Ramayana, and of course, modern economics as we understand today. But the first and foremost thing that comes to my mind in all these things is, what is the origin of government? How did modern governments begin? And how did they expand their role? And what was attributed originally to governments? And how governments have become so vast, so all-pervasive, and as I call it, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient government. In fact, I can say with some
phone madilla sir nange ide sir madilla yaro.
Hello. Okay, I think there was some unintended disturbance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. So as I said, that we tend to give too much of weightage to government. We tend to give too much of weightage to what the government does or doesn't do. And in the process, we forget that government has a very small role in our lives, even today. But first, let me take you to the origins of the government and what it actually meant and how the whole construct has been done. There's a brilliant book which I during the research I could get across, was one by Noel Harari, who has written a book called Sapiens, and it traces the origin of government the way we see it today, say somewhere around the 17th or the 16th century. What governments did at that time was to tell you that you become an individual. You better be an individual. You don't listen to your parents. You don't listen to your family members, elders. You break all traditions. And I will have a direct relationship with you. If you want employment, I will give you employment. If you want insurance, I'll give you insurance. If you want to marry the boy of your choice, I will recognize that marriage. If you want to divorce the husband or the wife, I will recognize the divorce. I will give you all credibility that you will actually become an atomized individual. Now, this is very interesting. This theory struck me as the core of statehood. The core of statehood is that you don't listen to Giridharji, you don't listen to parents, you don't listen to elders, you become a rebel. And you couch it with some artificial or big words like fundamental rights, freedom of speech, liberalism, all these things. But a rebel you must be a constant rebel, that you must not listen to elders and the family members, and you become distanced away. And this had a profound impact. The moment you are torn away from the family, the moment you are divorced from your own family, the moment you are not connected to your family, the state had to step in. And it stepped in to give you job, it gave you succor, it gave you pension funds, it gave you insurance. In short, it started doing what the family was doing, say, in the 15th century or in the 14th century. So slowly state started coming in. And as state started coming in, we saw an omnipotent state. The state started coming and giving you everything. We also agreed and took it on ourselves that here is a nanny state, so nice of it that it is coming and giving every sort of thing to us. And the nanny state was born. And as the nanny state was born, the state started taxing you. And in fact, the Income Tax Act, as we all understand, was probably an origin as late as 19th century, late second half or the early 20th century. Income tax was not known in the way it is today. Only in the First World War, the French government started taxing maximum. And then income tax became a huge revenue spinner. So was indirect taxes. We had all forms of it. And then we started the state also coming and saying that I will do this, I will do that. To that extent today in Tamil Nadu, they give you mixie and grinder. So you can understand where the nanny state has descended to. It will give you mixie and grinder. Next step is to give you dowry also. So that will be the extent to which the state is becoming a very pliable, helpful nanny state. But these are profound implications. The more the taxes, I will come to the taxes issue later, but I will just deal with this now, that taxes rose, the state's expenditure also rose. And the state always looked at it something like this. I'm sure all of us would have read the story of the ant and the grasshopper, which is one of the favorite Aesop's fables. All of us know that the ant works very hard in summer. It stores its food for the winter. Winter comes, the ant is able to eat from the food that is stored, whereas the grasshopper was singing and dancing in the whole of summer. It did not get enough to store, and then it is shivering. And then the moral or the Aesop fables tells us that you have to work hard. You have to make hay while the sun shines, store food when the summer, so that you can deal with the winter better. But today there is a perversion of this story. What it is, the grasshopper will be shown by some channels. Ant is leading a luxurious life. Grasshopper is shivering. And what is our parliament doing? See the stark reality. People are enjoying their dinner when the grasshopper is struggling for its food. Prevention of Cruelty to Grasshoppers Act will be brought in by the parliament. They will say we have to tax the ants more. We will have to see that the more money is taken away from the ants so that the grasshopper is funded. And in that, you will find that 55% or around that will be spent on bureaucracy for collection and distribution of these taxes. Tamil Nadu spends around 50% or 55% on salaries to 1.5% of the population of the total taxes. Another 10% is interest, and another 15% is your administration expense, or somewhere around 80% goes in three heads. Central government spends around 20%, 15 to 20%. So you have to get a complex idea that taxes have been the way in which civilizations have been pauperized. Nobody has earned prosperity through taxes, whether it is the ant or whether it is the grasshopper. But in the IRS building in America, they have said taxes is a price that we pay for civilization. Every Indian knows that British taxed us and looted us to the extent of $45 trillion. Today, our GDP is around $3 trillion. That is, per year we are earning $3 trillion now. The loot from British India, by the British from British India in those 100 years was approximately $45 trillion as per 2009 dollar terms. This has been now well tabulated, we all know. Even now, our leaders also follow the same taxation methodology. To 2021, June 27th, our taxation model is basically what the British did. I will give you a classical example on this. I'm sure people who are chartered accountant here will vouch for this. There is a section called 80G. G for Gautam. Okay, 80G. Don't mistake it with the RSSG. So it is 80G. So this 80G is a very peculiar section. It says you must or you can donate up to 10% of your income, and 10% of your income which is donated is allowed as an expenditure, or you will get a deduction under Chapter 6A of the Income Tax Act. Now, why that is 10%? 1961 Act, I went up to 1961 Act, I found it was 10%. Then I realized it was also there in the 1922 Act. So you go to the 1922 Act, you find it is still 10%. Why it is 10% under the 1922 Act? Because the British were ruling and they brought in this 1922 Act with 10%. Why is that 10% in the British Act? Why not 12%? Why not 8%? Why not 25%? Because under the Catholic law, if you are a true Christian, you must give 10% of your income as charity. So those who use 80G in a way are Christians. This is the only corollary we can take, that they follow the Christian law. The 80G law is linked to the Christian philosophy. In other words, if I want to donate the entire salary under 80G, even subject to other conditions that is imposed, I will get only a limited 10% deduction for the 90% which I have donated, but I have not actually used it in my own hands. Despite it, I will be taxed for that balance 90%. Now, why did we have this? Is because when we had this constitution being drawn up, we did not think about what is the role of the government, what is the role of an individual. We found that we have to atomize the person like the way it has been atomized by various constitutions in the Western world. In fact, Pandit Nehru, in his one of his speeches in the Constituent Assembly debates, says, look at France, look at Italy, look at Germany, how they have conducted their affairs. Not one word about a civilization that has been in existence for 5,000 years, 8,000 years, the barest minimum. He drew inspiration from West, especially France, Italy, Germany, which are all 300, 400, 500 years of civilization at best. And he says, those are the people with whom we will have to borrow the ideas. And modern ideas comes from, whenever we say modern ideas means, it comes from Europe or USA. So when the modern ideas came from there, we found that to our utter confusion, that we have only atomized the Indian. In fact, the first article of the Constitution, which is creating a lot of issues in Tamil Nadu today, the first few words are very interesting. It says, India, that is Bharat. No other country has two names. I checked up. If I am corrected, I will be happy. Either you are India or you are Bharat. India, that is Bharat. So how can India be Bharat? Bharat is something which we know is an ancient land named after an ancient king. But India, that is Bharat. So we are also Indians, that is Bharatiyas. And Indians, that is Bharatiyas, means that we suffer from dual personality disorder, bipolar disorder. Whenever I deal with the state, I am formal, I am right-oriented, I want my rights, I establish my rights, I debate my rights, I question my rights, I don't want to cede my rights, and I am fundamentally talking about my rights. But when I come to talk to a friend, father, mother, relative, family, I instantly become Bharatiya. I talk only about my duty. This is the peculiarity of our Indians today. While dealing with the states, we are Indian, and there is a good Tamil movie also, which was dubbed in Telugu, which was acted by this hero was Vikram. He suffered from multiple personality disorders. So at one time he will be a very pious.
Aparijits.
Aparijit, exactly.
Aparijits.
Yes, we are all Aparijits. That means we cannot recognize ourselves. That we don't have an identity. We are suffering from an identity crisis because we don't know what we are while dealing with the state. While we're dealing with our informal way, with our family, friends, relatives, we are all absolutely in a very informal state. We talk about our duties. So this leads to a question, why this happened? Now, the answer to this comes from the fact that most Western philosophers, thinkers, writers have predominantly based their theories on Christian theology. Thomas Hobbes, for instance, who was a great thinker and who has developed this atomization theory of individuals and the modern state, has said that man is intrinsically bad, brutish, selfish, and this is how man is described in the natural state. Now, to correct this negative personality, we require an omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient state. Now, how does Christianity come in here? Christians believe that a man is a born sinner because Adam and Eve created the first mistake. And since Adam and Eve created the first mistake, every single man who is born or a woman who is born subsequently are all sinners because God told them not to do something and they did that precisely. So we are all offsprings of that original sin. So we are all born sinners. So if you see any of these padris in one of this church, they will address you only as Pavihale. Whereas contrast with what says Swami Vivekananda talks about a person. He says you are a potentially divine soul. Your soul is potentially divine. We see goodness. Whereas in Christianity, you are born sinner and it is Christ who has to redeem you. And Christ is only an external agent, and that is as far as theology is concerned. As far as constitutionality is concerned, the secular world is concerned, you require an omnipotent, omniscient state. That is how state has been created. So whether it is Karl Marx, whether it is Thomas Hobbes, whether it is Richard Dawkins in case of evolutionary gene theory in evolutionary biology, you take any of this Christian or even Sigmund Freud, all these people have used this basic theory of original sin. And a brilliant book, which I chanced to get it, was by Charles Boyce, titled Born Bad. Lays bare this Christendom's ideology. And he says, Christian domination in major philosophies, major ideologies, major theories is what is modern theories all about. Constitution is one such thing that we the people of India, meaning we the people of India, all of us individuals have come together to give onto ourselves a constitution. This is the preamble, the first few words of the preamble. This is called the Pact of Unionists and Pact of Subjectivists. Pact of Unionists, all of us come together. Pact of Subjectivists, all of us subject ourselves to the superiority of the Constitution and to promise that we will abide by the Constitution. So we said the state is omnipotent. And incidentally, today is 27th June. Yesterday we had to remind ourselves that in 1975, the Constitution itself was suspended. And then Palkiwala argued on the basic structure doctrine. And he said that the fundamental rights are inalienable rights. How does it mean? What does it mean? It means we all enter into a contract And when we entered into a contract, we gave the state the superior power, but not to this extent that it can shoot us and nobody can question it. That is what ADM Jabalpur was going on when ADM Jabalpur was being discussed in the Supreme Court. Nirande, the then Attorney General, famously is supposed to have said, "It may shock your conscience, it may shock my, it does shock mine, but my lords will know that if a police officer during emergency shoots anybody, nobody can take recourse to Part 3 of the Constitution." So that is the extent to which we went. Of course, water has flown, too much water has flown through the Ganga, we have reversed it, but fundamental rights is basically a sort of an arrangement, interim arrangement, wherein we cede the power to the state and the state becomes a dominant factor. And when it becomes a dominant factor, it becomes a dominant factor in economy also. So what happens? Now we started giving too much of power to the state and it started intruding. Then we said the state cannot handle these things. We have to divest the state of all its responsibilities, several of its responsibilities. You divest the state of Air India, you divest the state of steel companies, coal mines, insurance companies. We are arguing. And so we first nationalized our responsibilities. Then we privatized the responsibilities from the state to the companies, various people. But when we gave it to companies, the companies also found that they had become the surrogate state. They have to become the surrogate state. That means there should be no competition. They must eliminate competition. They must function like a state. To acquire the characteristics of the state, they must be large enough. And they wanted various shall I say, benefits to be bestowed by the government. So government started bestowing various benefits to the private company. So large corporates become, and they started, say, peddling in insurance. They started peddling in airports. They started peddling in ports, infrastructure. What was traditionally the responsibilities of the state has been taken over by corporates. Then corporates also realized that this is not possible. We cannot spread the risk only within a particular geography. We will have to spread this risk across geographies, and that will be like globalizing corporates. So nationalize, destroy families, atomize individuals, you create an omnipotent state, then privatize the responsibilities of the state, then you globalize the companies. Now globalization is not working. People do not know what next. We have to wait for the next real advancement in economics. Then only we can go back and say this will work on this all only by hire and fire method, testing method. It's a grand experiment. Economics is not a destination point. We are only conducting a grand experiment on ourselves to understand our weaknesses and our failings. Now, how should it work? This is where I think we should concentrate in the next 10-15 minutes of my lecture, and then I will close. Yeah. One of the important things, as I said, this rights movement was a deviation because we wanted to create fundamental rights as a balancing factor. Now, fundamental rights per se are not a balancing factor. In my humble view, I have argued that fundamental duties must also accompany fundamental rights. This is a land of Karmanya Vadikarasya. You may not understand Gita, and surely I have not understood the Gita in its entirety. It may take probably 2-3 janmas to read Gita in full 700 odd verses and to understand it in its all its dimension. But one small shloka or a verse which all of us will immediately connect to is Karmanya Vadikarasya. That you have a right to your duty and not to the fruits thereof. Every Indian, literate and not literate, whether he is a North Indian, South Indian, wherever he is, Kashmir to Kohima, Kohima to Kandla, Kandla to Kottayam, everybody will understand that this is a shloka where there is a profound meaning. And the duties are not there either for the state or for the individuals. We have created, civilizationally, the Bharatiya respects duties. Bharatiya sees only duties. But as an Indian, we see only rights in the Constitution. And if there is one article in the Constitution, it is 51 capital A, which talks about duties, which was introduced during the emergency. It is a dead letter, it is an ornamental piece, it is nothing functional about it, it is not justiciable. Probably we need to go back to the Constitution and perhaps redraw part 3 of the Constitution and introduce fundamental duties in the Constitution. This is the first major recommendation probably we need to do. It is no point in beginning the Prime Minister or your Chief Minister or your MLA, MP and say that Corona failed gaya hai, without realizing that you have not done your part of the duty, that is keep your distances, keep your mask, sanitize your hands, keep yourself away from so many things, and do's and don'ts, and maintain the Corona protocol. It's easy for us to blame others, but it is very difficult to create a land of 1.3 billion people who adhere to these fundamental duties. And Corona is a case in point. I'm only trying to put it in a contemporary milieu. But the fact of the matter is, whether it is Corona or whether it's something larger or smaller, unless there is a participation by the individual who understands that he owes it to his family, society, duty, country, everybody, we cannot challenge ourselves to become a superpower or a Vishwaguru that we want to aspire to become. Fundamental rights is not the way. Probably we may have to bring in a concept of fundamental duty. And this will take me to where it will work in economics. Ideally, I would say today that our taxes to GDP ratio is anywhere between 15 to 20%. Whereas the advanced countries like say America, it will be 40% and there are some Scandinavian countries where your tax to GDP ratio will be as high as 55-60%. Now, a tax to GDP ratio, whenever we sit in budgets, in fact, I am condemned to listen to many of this verbal diarrhea by several of these economists. So they on one hand, they will say, government must privatize. Government must give away so much functions. And say, yes, at last I found somebody very intelligent. And the next breath you will say, government must increase tax GDP ratio. When you are giving away the functions, why do you want to collect money from the people and say that I want to use that money? That means you do not even understand the fundamental problem of economics. That if you don't have a duty, you don't have to collect taxes. Problem with governments and Nehruvian socialism, which is what has driven us to this stage, revolves around chastising the grasshopper. Chastising the ant and making a model of grasshoppers. We have become a country of grasshoppers. We believe that we should only have grasshoppers in the country and there should be no ants. And ants, if they are going to be taxed like this, ants, if they are going to be penalized like this, ants, if they feel that they are going to be secondary citizens in this country because they work too hard, but they have to pay so much of taxes to the government and the exchequer, the ants will start migrating outside. This is my fear, and this is what will happen. Roman Empire fell because they are dictators and other things. But if you read Mel Gibbons, you will find that Gibbons was very clear that you had a citizenry, and in fact, Marcus Aurelius was distributing pork, oil, and bread free of cost. And Romans, who centuries back were hardworking and created the famous Roman Empire, were standing in the queue to get these freebies. And when that happened, all that it took was some local groups to wage a war on Roman Empire, and Roman Empire collapsed. And in between, of course, they had this great colosseums where wrestling matches and other things will happen. Instead of those type of things, we are having IPL. You must understand, whether IPL or other things, it is almost the same. So only the games have changed. Even the colosseum structure has not changed over the last 2000 years. So how should we deal with this situation? What should we do? Probably, as I said, we have to go back to the drawing board and understand what is the duty of the government. In fact, in my previous lecture, I think I did dwell upon this in this August platform. I will refresh the memories of those who were there then, and for those who are not there, then probably this may be something new to you. That when the constitution was being drawn up, the right to taxes was also being decided, and on November 17th, 1947, they formed a committee, the Constitutional Assembly formed a committee of Nalini Sarkar, Nalini Ranjan Sarkar, that is the name of that person, who was tasked with finding a taxation system for this country. And that committee gives a report on 5th December. So the entire debate of how much to tax, what to tax, was all taken between 17th November and 5th December 1947. How could they do it within 20 days? They did not go anywhere. They looked at the Government of India Act 1935, which was devised again by the British. So they said no taxes can be collected without the authority of law. And then they went about and this Schedule 1, List 1, List 2 and List 3. That the List 1 is of the center, List 2 is of the state, and List 3 is the concurrent list, was drawn up. So we decided right from day one that we will be a socialist country. We will tax any amount of taxes. Only thing, it has to have the sanction of law. And we went to this extent of saying that come what may, that the only debate is whether Tamil Nadu should have 45% of the taxes collected or 55%. Whether if it is 55%, it will be called federalism. Federalism will be saved, and 45% it is there, then it will be a great ignominy heaped on the states. That is the only debate. The debate is not whether to tax or not. The debate is not whether this tax will be used by the state for a purpose for which this is the purpose of the state. Whether the government has this duty fundamentally bestowed on it. Because since there is no, I would say, a constitutional vacuum in the framing of the constitution, where there is no guarantee that the state will do certain things. State has a right, you have a right. Your right matches the state's right. State has a right to tax you, you have a right to seek fundamental rights. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less. So it is civilizationally, it is duty versus my duty. Your duty versus my duty is how we have constructed our society. Whereas in the state, it is state's right to tax versus state right. This is Nehruvian socialism. That every country which has taxed its people has ended up in poverty. And this is not to say that there should be no tax. Please be very clear about it. I am not one to say that we should not have taxes. But what I am against is a rampant welfarism that has crept in. And many of us who were critical about even Manrega, which is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, to our horror found out that even Mr. Narendra Modi in the floor of the parliament conceded that he will continue to retain it, but he couched it in a different language. He said, I will have it as a memorial of Congress's inefficiency. Once a program is introduced, a welfare measure is introduced, even great leaders like Narendra Modi, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan have found it difficult to roll back a welfare scheme. The more welfare you create, the more incentive you are giving to the people to sit back and become a grasshopper. If taxes are used to create skills, if taxes are used to create assets, something wonderful would happen. Nehruvian socialism still exists in this country. The entire state budgets, the state government's approach is all towards welfare. In fact, there was a competitive race to the bottom in this summer when elections were held in Tamil Nadu, where each party was vying with the other to say that we will give you some sort of monthly dole of 2,000 rupees or 2,500. Who does fund it? Nobody asks this question. Where from you will get the money? And when the money comes from rising petrol, when money comes from taxes of raising the price of diesel, nobody has the courage to point it out that this goes towards funding your 2,000 rupee dole. Is this the way we want to conduct our macroeconomic affairs? Is this the way? Is this the right way to do it? Is this the way to have center or the government at the central of our affairs, of managing our individual affairs? Should it not be family? Should it not be something like duties? How should we manage the affairs of the state? Should it be recklessly taxing its way? Should it not be finding out some alternative? Probably in 1946 to 48, when the Constitution Assembly was formed, debated, they did not have time. Please understand, at that time, our forefathers were exhausted. After 1,000 years, we had received independence. But today, time is right. This generation goes into this great land of ours to go back and redraw the Constitution. At least part 3 of the Constitution. We need to look back and say that we will not be looking at the Constitution the way it is based on Christian theology, but it will be in a way that will suit the genius of this country. The way it will address to the fundamental rights or fundamental duties of every Bharatiya. Not in the way we have understood it in the last 60, 70 years. And once we understand the macro picture, automatically economics will follow. You can't have a state which is what it is structured. You can have M.R. Venkatesh also as a prime minister. You can have Giridhar Mamidi as a prime minister. But they will all be only practicing Nehruvian economics. The state is condemned to Nehruvian economic model. You can remove political parties. You can say a right-wing party has come in. You can say we have created this, we have created that, we expect this, we expect that. But finally, when it comes to deliverance, you cannot play cricket with the football. We must understand this. So I would only urge, and that would be my solid recommendation to probably Giridharji, who can chew this about and think about this to take it forward. Whether part 3 of the Constitution needs to be balanced. It is too skewed in favor of rights. It has to be skewed in favor of duties. And once it is done, we will know what is the duty of the state. And if we know the duty of the state, we will know the duty of the individual. Once we know the duty of the state and the individual, we will know in which place the state will come in. And in which place the state cannot come in. And in places where the state cannot come in, we need not tax. And where the state has to come in, we will definitely tax the people. Defense is one of them. The state has to provide defense, law and order, justice. We have 100 different things. But what is happening? We have Minister for Culture. We have Minister for so many things where we don't even understand what is the end game, what is the objective. Finally, Minister for Culture ends up in having this lighting some places, putting some bulbs here and there and making some nice places of our monuments. The monument tax is what is they are administering. But Culture Minister has gone to the Supreme Court and has debunked Ramayana and said Ram was literally a cartoon character. In 2009, it happened. All of us know. So you understand what is the depravity in our system. Unless we settle this, we cannot have a nation prospering enough and delivering for our own people and pulling them out of the poverty. Unfortunately, the time is running away. We need to relook at our Constitution. We look at the way we are managing our affairs, and of which taxation, welfare will all be a subset. And once we settle this debate, I am sure we will rise in the Committee of Nations. and we will be what we will be. That we will civilizationally respond to the Western challenges far better than being a photocopy of the Westerners and trying to challenge the Westerners. With this, I will stop here and I will only take some questions if you have any. Thank you once again, Giridharji, for your opportunity. And I hope that this message that we need to discuss will be taken forward in a manner that probably with your finish, you can take it forward.
Thank you, Venkateshji. Thank you so much for that, pretty erudite, presentation of the real crux of the problem. The crux of the problem obviously is somewhere we have forgotten our dharma of, what you are calling in terms of responsibilities, essentially should be our dharma. Our artha cannot happen without dharma. That is how our ancestors have taught us, and that's precisely what you have alluded. Wonderful, fantastic. I think this is precisely what is badly needed now. But like what you said, would the governments that we have the guts to really undo what damage has been done in the last 70 years is a moot question. We only live on hope. But yes, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had done some things which gave us some hope. When he came, he started talking about Swachh Bharat, he started talking about responsibilities. Probably is the first Prime Minister who have ever done that. Probably we need lots more of it, but then that's the way it is. Wonderful. I think before I hand it over to Srinivas Ji to conduct the question answer session, maybe a couple of my own issues, my own questions, Venkatesh Ji. One, don't you think that while the Nehruvian system is too deep rooted for anybody to really, change the situation drastically, can we start with electoral reforms? Because if somebody is offering, grinders and dowry to people to attract votes, I think the root cause is in our electoral system. I understand that, unless we rectify some of these core aspects of our constitution, we can't get there. But again, election itself is a Christian binary. There is a winner takes all, and then even if you lose by one vote, you're a loser. Don't you think the problem lies there? That's where all these politicians are, their only aim is to win the next election. So your entire economics, everything is hinged on that. So what do you have to say for that?
I agree with you. We have to make a start somewhere, no doubt about it. But now if I say that people have gone to the courts and have argued that, look, here is something that giving TVs, in fact, during Karunanidhi's time, I think there was a writ which was being filed to suggest that if you give a TV that's not in the scheme of things, but the courts also brushed it aside that we don't have a power to encroach or intermediate the relationship between a voter and a political party that is aspiring to come to power. So what should be given and what should not be given is a matter between the voter and the political party. So we cannot, it is not justiciable. That's what they probably meant, and shooed away that petition. I vaguely remember that petition was never ever brought out, or was it dismissed also, I don't know. But the fact of the matter, as a student of law, I can tell you that if tomorrow you say that you are going to give grinder in the state of, say, Telangana, and woo the voters, or any such thing. When I say grinder, I'm not into the issue of anything specific. I'm rather into the issue of welfare and what is degenerated from welfare into a reckless populism. That is what is, we have no definition of what is welfare, what is populism, what is socialism, what is communism. All these things have become hazy to me. And that is why I would say that probably we require a macroeconomic framework that has to come together with a constitutional amendment that would put across this as stopgap arrangement, I would agree with you that we may probably require an electoral amendment, but we need to have a serious debate because this is not merely limited to elections. My presentation was to encompass various dimensions of life. Of course, elections are very important.
Yeah. Friends, as I had mentioned before the start of this program, we are not unmuting people for allowing them to talk, for obvious reasons. So kindly send your questions to Srinivas. He's come with the tagline called Srini. You please send it to him. He would be the moderator who would moderate all the questions, and he would, decide which ones to ask. But then, of course, I will let Sirishji ask his question, and then the rest of them, I'm sorry, please kindly send your questions to Sriniji. Sirishji is our, president of our Telangana unit. So I would let him ask a question. But before he asks, Venkateshji, for us to get to this situation where we're going to talk about duties as the paramount guiding force behind our constitution. Under the current circumstances, nothing is going to happen. So even in, like what you said, even you become the prime minister, I become the prime minister, we are all part of the same system. So where is the hope for this?
The hope
where do you start and how do you get to that kind of a situation? When nothing is going to change, whoever comes in, Modi or anybody comes in, it's the same situation. How do we do it?
Hope is people like Giridhar Mamedi. Hope is people like Artha Yagya, because it is people who bring in the change. It is people like you and me who have brought in the change. So we have to be eternally optimistic about it. We have to be hoping that what we saw today as 50, 80 people coming together, and probably the message spreads, debates happen. Probably my theory that duties has to be brought into the constitution will be junk. I have no issues on that. But we need to understand that we have never debated this. And let us go through the whole hog, create the right type of traction. Probably there will be erudite scholars who may come up with a better idea. Once this comes in as a moment, probably this may not be happening even in my lifetime. It may happen 30, 40, 50 years away. And in which case, probably this is something that we have shown today, that it takes a huge banyan tree-like growth in the next 30, 40 years. Let it happen. We are civilizational people. For us, 30, 40 years is no meaning. So we anything less than 3,000 years has no meaning for us. So we will hope that it will happen. But the debate must go on. That is the more important thing.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, but we live on hope as always. I now request Sirishji to ask his question, and then I'll hand it over to Srinivasji to moderate it. I request all of you to kindly send your question to Srinivasji. You can see his handle as Srini. Please direct your questions to him, and he shall be the moderator. As I'm repeating it again. So please excuse us because we're not allowing others to talk, given our past experience. So I hope you all understand that. I request all of you to send your questions to Sriniji, and he will be the moderator. Thank you. Sirishji, please.
Namaskar. Venkateshji.
Namaste.
Welcome to our forum and for giving us your time and talk on need to unshackle Bharat's economy from Nehruvian socialism. I have heard your talk, a very wide-ranging talk on socialism and economics. You have highlighted very correctly the reckless gifting and doling out of, money to people on one pretext or the other by the different state government, or you can say more precisely by the state political parties. You have said that people are taxed in Nehruvian socialism, and that is very confusing for me. So I would just like to say that what you have said is about the depravities of our system and all that. Yeah, every system whether it is capitalism, socialism, or any other way of government like dictatorships or democracy, has its own deprived way. Though over the years it happens. But the talk was on need to unshackle. I don't think you have really given us, this is the way, like you are a chartered accountant. I was hoping that you would say how 1, 2, 3, 4, or the direction in which we can progress and unshackle, number one. Number two, sir, as you rightly said, ours is a democracy. Yes, we are a democracy. So what do you suggest as a solution? And my question is, how would any party do it in a democracy? If anybody wants to become or becomes, whether you or Giridhar Mamidi becomes prime minister, fine, you have to come in a democratic way. If you are able to come and get the people's confidence and get in the seat of the executive, then you definitely will have a chance. But right now, as a chartered accountant, what do you see as, suggest as a way, and how you propose to do it in a democracy?
Okay. Sir, the entire presentation was primarily aimed at one thing, that Nehruvian socialism was nothing but what was there in the Act of 1935, the Government of India Act, which again, what the British gave us, taxes more, and they looted us. Here it is spent on various things that on which the government should not stand. Unless you reverse this by saying that government will do this and government positively will not do this. Government need not interfere in your day-to-day life as to what you should do and what you should not do. On one hand, we are saying that we want privacy laws, but on the other hand, we want it to be a welfare state that comes right up to the bedroom. So there is a paradox here which we need to understand and address. Now, to what extent it should be a nanny state is something that probably I cannot say or you cannot say. But to say that the state should have no duty and individual should have no duty addresses the core of my concern of Nehruvian economic model, which does not talk about a civilizational dimension in the approach to economics. And that is what is the core part of my presentation. So I would only say that instead of giving A, B, C, D, 10 different things and saying that you reduce taxes here or you do increase taxes there, my sole point in addressing your concern would be that fundamentally address the part 3 of the Constitution, rewrite the role of the state, and then talk about taxation, and then come about and say this is what you will do and you will not do. I hope, sir, once if it is done, you will have several of these issues that is plaguing us will automatically be taken care, because that is a overarching issue that is now facing us. We need to address that pronto. We need to address what should be our contribution to the economy. We cannot be allowing ourselves to be supinely indifferent and say that the state will take care of these things. I'll give you a classical example. Probably your grandfather had a well in the house. Your father and your time, it is basically metro water supply or water that is being supplied by the government, state government. Your children will get water only from private companies or global companies. So what happens to you as an individual is that you are being subjected to a corrosive economic model in which you lose your liberty, and in the name of getting something, you are completely being deprived of your relationship to your environment. I didn't go, because it's a 45-minute talk. Nehruvianism did not bother about these things. It doesn't talk about consequences of burdening the state with enormous amount of responsibilities, as well as taxing the individual. It cannot be that way around. We have to find out a new model. And only one step that I have argued is duties. And I will stop there, because unless we address the issue of duties, we are not going to move further away from Nehruvian economic model. Let us take the first step and then see how do we drive that.
Sure, thanks. I mean, given the kind of limited time that we have, I think there could be many more issues, but then I think.
Girish, I have dealt with all these things in my book. Of course, that would address quite a range of it. In the sense, I have taken only a small portion, and in 45 minutes, I have tried to impress this audience of this.
Sure, sure. I'm sorry, it's a very vast subject. I don't think we can really crunch everything into a short period. Thanks, Sirishji, for that intervention. And now I would hand it over to Srinivas ji to take it forward. Srinivas ji, please go ahead.
Thank you, Giridharji. First of all, on behalf of all the people, most comments are, first of all, to thank you for such a erudite explanation on the current status. So thank you, Venkateshji. So we have actually lots and lots of questions. Okay, we have many questions. So how much time do we have? So based on that, I'll prioritize.
Yeah, you can ask whatever you can ask. You prioritize. Let us see. No problem.
So let me start with
15-20 minutes.
Yeah,
maybe 15 minutes.
Then we have only 5. Then we have to limit it to 5 questions only.
Yeah, we'll take it right there.
So let me first of all, I think. You have clearly explained that the role of a finance minister, okay, seems to be limited because people are looking at options, people are looking at strategies, people are looking at some ideas. But based on your talk, it looks like the role of a finance minister is quite limited given the vision and the flexibility. Is it right to assume that, a finance minister plays that kind of a role in fostering growth and making all these changes? Is it possible without all the other changes, sir?
See, finance minister can definitely play a role. It's not that they have not played their role. They have definitely played their role, and several finance ministers over the past 70 years have given a lot of hope, lot of encouragement, and within the ambit of the constitution, they have played their role phenomenally well. No two opinions about it. And today, if you look back, say even between, I saw Drishyam 1, which was shot say 7 years ago or 8 years ago, coinciding with the rise of Narendra Modi, and Drishyam 2 during this lockdown. I could see even that character played by Mohan Lal, his lifestyle has changed considerably in the last 7 years. So to that extent, you should say Modi hai to mumkin hai. So that I can notice it. So be that as it may, finance ministers also you have to understand, are like Jesus Christ on the cross. They have that much elbow room. They suffer from a huge amount of expenditure that is brought down. And I think when I addressed Pragya Bharati last January in the pre-budget talk, I did point out that almost all expenditures are pigeonholed. There is not much of fiscal intervention possible except to the extent of 1 or 2% of the budget, for which you have to raise taxes also, or find out revenue resources which will ensure that the fiscal deficit is between that same percentage points. Of course, the last 2 years, thanks to Corona, that has no meaning. So the point is, without fiscal stimulus, the finance ministers have to enter into what is called as the policy thicket. So they have to give hope. They can't do much. They can't spend. For example, if Government of India wants to modernize all schools across the country, it is 30 lakh crores. Now, if they are going to spend that much money also on schools, nothing much will change because they have to change bureaucracy. You have judiciary, you have the same set of teachers, syllabus has to change, whether it's Hindi has to be taught, in English it has to be taught. So many confusions will be there. But policy-wise, they can be more proactive, especially last 2-3 budgets. I have said that the finance ministers have to be more proactive on the policy front because they sell hope. When this Fair and Lovely cream is being sold to many ladies, they are not selling a whitening cream, skin whitening cream. They are selling hope. If you use this, you will look much fairer. And women or ladies buy it, that hope. You have to give that hope. If you use my budget, if you look into this economy will transform, and this is what I promise. That positive attitude has to come from the finance minister, which it has not come in good measure, is what I would say, in this last 2-3 budgets.
So going ahead, I think without the economic vision, which is to be laid out at a much broader spectrum, including the parliament and maybe including many components. Is it possible to make minor changes to these tax structures and trying to foster the kind of growth we deserve? Is it possible? So the first challenge seems to be the constitutional changes, right?
Yeah. Once you do that, the rest will fall into place. That is what I was telling Shirish ji also. So you can as Girish ji or I would Giridhar ji or I would talk about whether ATG will be like this, or whether GST form 3 has to be filed now, or form 7 has to be filed 1 week later, or whether the rate has to be 16% or 18%. We can debate all these things, but these are all fringe of the fringe of the fringe. But if you want to talk about something very substantial that talks about a new economic model and give away the Nehruvian idea of a domnipotent state, or what they call as the commanding heights of the national economy being in the hands of the public sector, you have to necessarily give away a socialist order. And a socialist order means that to be rich is to be a sinner. In our movies, all our villains will be the rich people. In our real life, we believe that if you are rich, you have broken a law, and that's why you are rich. In other words, laws are not created to make you prosperous. Laws are only to create you poor. So this mindset that we require and create to allow wealth creators to come in, to allow wealth to come in, to share prosperity. We are actually sharing poverty. Government's whole program is to share poverty. If you are slightly richer than me, bring him down to my level, not to elevate me to your level. So that mindset has to change. And if that has to change, we have to give away the socialist order. We have to do away with fundamental changes to our constitution. We have to think afresh. We have to think every human being has a tremendous potential and a capacity. We have to make him understand his duties. We have to give skill. We have to impart education. There is a definitive role, but it must be a residuary role for the state. If we understand these things in the broad parameter, then rest of all, whether GST is 18% or 16%, we have to tinker these things. Whether income tax has to be filed by 31st of March or 30th of September is all a matter of detailing, which I don't think so. This audience will be too interested.
So,
yeah, and I think Jamshedji Tata was, I think recently, a couple of days back, the report came in. He was the biggest philanthropist among the top, industrialists of the world. That itself proves that, the concept of philanthropy is, what you said, dharma, the kind of duty, what exists in Bharat. I'm sorry, Srinivasji, please go ahead.
Yeah. So in our ancient texts and, our wisdom that we got from, that we inherited, how do we find the moral rule, or rather moral character, to motivate every citizen of this country to work? Because only if every citizen is able to work and contribute as a duty, only then we can grow. How do we enable that, both on the moral side and on the constitutional side? How do we enable that?
See, that requires greater detailing, but I can tell you that there is a Madison report. And Gurmurthy ji has given a lecture in the year 2010, if my memory serves me right, in IIT Bombay, where he has traced some of these numbers of ancient Bharat. And from Christian era, common era, beginning 0 AD till say 17th century or even beginning of 18th century, India dominated global economy. Our global share was 25%, 30%, 33%, going up and down along with traditional China, which also had almost the same numbers. So India plus China was around 60% on the whole aggregate of the global GDP. Now, this was possible because people were skilled, people were educated, people were employed. There was a harmonious balance between all these factors. In fact, I always tell my students, whenever I teach economics, that economics is a simple subject made complicated by economists. Economics is a very simple subject. You have production. Production is for consumption. Consumption must not lead to avariciousness or extreme consumption. There must be restricted consumption, which will allow savings. Savings must lead to investment. Investment must again bring to production. So production, consumption, savings, investment. That is why Goddess Lakshmi has got 4 limbs. Chaturbhuja is because she is constantly reminding that you have to balance between the 4 for a structural functioning of an economy. Now, one side suddenly consumption goes up or production goes up. You have excesses. You are not able to balance. So you create monetary policy, taxation policy, fiscal policy, trade policy, currency policy. All these are to balance these 4 subsystems in the economy, which is not automatically balanced. Now, to answer your question, can the government ever balance this, you tell me?
Not in the short run.
Not in the short run, not in the long run. Please understand, for 60, 70 years, it has never happened. What has happened? That how is that Indian economy or the Chinese economy for centuries has been like this, whereas modern economics is not able to find the balancing factor. The missing balancing factor is individual restraint, or what we call as civilizational restraint. But civilization is not being taken, or cultural factors is not being taken into economics for a simple reason. Today's economics is more mathematics, less of economics. Since mathematics cannot capture culture and civilization as in a mathematical formula, they have rejected civilization and culture, and they also said every man is an individual. So we are not having a precise answer to modern economic tools. First, to make the tools in economics. We don't want economic reforms. Economics is in need of reforms. You must understand that. First you reform economy, then we will reform Indian economy. Your economics is having a basic drawback.
So you're bringing me back to another question that people had, is that education, the lack of education seems to be the problem. Now you're actually making it even more finer, saying lack of understanding of economics as a principle seems to lead to, you don't, even if you create brilliant economists, we are basically creating a bigger problem.
Yes, because you are teaching them wrong. We are teaching them something that is not there in normal life, or in a way we have to understand. Now let us understand what is happening with, I came up to globalization. Now let me give you a classical example what happens during globalization. Take the fishing community. Now in the next few days, fishing communities in several parts of coastal Tamil Nadu will not start fishing because this is the breeding season of the fish. They don't look at fish as an object. They look at fish as some sort of the harmonious existence where you go and fish, no doubt, but you don't do it in such excesses. You allow them to breed also during these months. But corporate faceless entities sitting somewhere don't understand why Tamil Nadu fishermen don't go to fish in the month of, say, Adi. They don't. For us, quarterly result is important in New York Stock Exchange or in London Stock Exchange or in Bombay Stock Exchange. We cannot say 1 quarter result is down. Then that will create a havoc in the stock market. Go and fish. What has happened is today, even in the ocean, fishes are in danger. Simple example. We have exploited nature. We have created so much of exploitation on forests, on fishes, on flora and fauna, that it is that we want to lead for our greed, not for our need. This economists don't understand. When you are going to reduce your ability to 3 months quarterly reports, subject to insider trading, norms of SEBI, this is what will happen. So economics, as I said, has to undergo transformation.
So, what would be the maximum growth possible for a country like India if you adopt a newer and more wider economic models? What is that? What is the dream that we can have for a wider inclusive economic growth?
the correct question would be, what would be the metrics of growth?
Metrics. That was our first question actually. How do we redefine the metrics of growth?
The metrics of growth will be health, prosperity, of people having skills, of people being able to rely on their own self to generate their own income, people educated. When I mean educated, they must not be able to sign their own name and hence called educated. They must really be educated. And this was what was traditional India 300 years back, 200 years back, where people used to understand these things. See, in Ram Rajya, there is less of Ram and more of Rajya. Ram Rajya is not that Ram came and said, "Don't you please sleep in your home, I will give you food, I will give you charity." No. Ram Rajya was all about Ram being in the back, in the rear side, but people putting their own initiative. If you want to get educated, you are saying that it is the fundamental right to be educated. But there is no fundamental duty on the parents to get a child educated. Do you know Mexico's constitution, article, if I remember correct, article 31 has this particular provision. In fact, the whole of Latin America, in those countries have something to do with duty. And in 1948, there was a Bogota conference where people were debating whether to have duties as a fundamental part of or the core part of the constitution. But the Americans had that idea of always fundamental rights, and individualism has crept in, and they thought about the omnipotent right because, as I said, they derived it from Thomas Hobbes and the Madison papers, which they wrote in the 18th century and 17th century, all having links with this type of ideas. They came up with their idea of UNHRC, Human Rights Declaration, and Mahatma Gandhi writes in 1940. If I remember, in 1947 or 46, to John Huxley, stating that there is nothing called rights without duties. Unfortunately, Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated on January 30th, 1948, even when the constitution was in embryonic stage. Had he been there and guided the Constitutional Assembly debate, we would have had more of duties and less of these rights. Rights without duties is only a Pyrrhic victory for a human being. It is not taking us anywhere. And if people like Mahatma Gandhi objected to the rights, we have to rethink about it.
This reminds me of an interesting observation by a very popular intellectual in the UK. His observation is that most secular states in the world, including US and other countries, Scandinavian, where it is part of the constitution, actually are less secular in practice, but monarchies like UK, they actually are much more secular, which means less role of a state actually gets what they want, better than actually state trying to achieve that. So probably economics is a parallel for that.
We will have to, I will not comment about this. I will reserve it for another day.
So another key question people are asking is, what is the relevance of the existing leading theoreticians like Keynesian models and maybe Marx and all of those mishmash of all the theories that have now led to our economic vision? What is the relevance of all of that, and how do we change that is another question people are asking.
See, world over, even when Lord Maynard Keynes was there, in 1945, when he propounded various economic model, especially of Keynesian model, which placed the government at the center of the economic activities, he was suggesting something very important, that after World War, there is not any country which is having the ability where private entrepreneurship could flourish, probably the sole exception of America. So his idea was taken. But at the same time, there was a great economist called Hayek. And Hayek suggested market economy and other things, which was not finding favor of the mainstream economists. And incidentally, in 1973 or 74, Hayek was awarded the Nobel. And Hayek became the economic guru of Margaret Thatcher and Reagan in the 80s. But whenever a crisis comes, we all become Keynesian. And that is what the Time magazine carried out a story of John Maynard Keynes somewhere in the year 1960 after his death. He was one of those rare economists to figure in the Time magazine after his death also. And in 2008, after the economic crisis, the same ideas were being propounded as what Keynesian model was proposing. So we alternate between Keynes and Hayek. Keynes, whenever our position becomes bad, when there is a global economic crisis, which means American economic crisis, you should understand, there is nothing called global economic crisis. All crises, whenever it happens in America, is called global. You have to substitute America with global. So global economic crisis has become, some sort of a pointer that we all have to adopt Keynesian model. But when the world become, when the economy stabilizes, when things started happening better, we always say we should privatize, we should go for marketism, we should do this and we should do that. So we are alternating between boom and bust, between Hayek and between Keynes. And more importantly, today, the crisis is, we do not know whether it is an economic crisis of 2008 or whether it's a financial crisis of 2008. Economics was always held to be a larger set of finance. Today, finance is said to be a larger set of which economics is supposed to be a subset. So world of finance is dominating the world of economics. This cannot happen. So unless, as I said, economics undergoes reforms. And what is economics? What is the end game of economics? How do we drive with personal duties and duties of the state? Things will not be answered.
So the recent discussions...
Maybe one or two more and we close it. Srinivasji, one or two more and we close it.
Yeah. We'll just take two more questions. Okay.
Right, thanks.
Recent discussions, especially in the political domain for the last 2 years at least, I think more in, like you described, the welfare state and the pitfalls of that. But the direction of discussion seems to be going towards universal basic income schemes.
Yeah.
Now that seems to become, the next big, holy grail for both politicians and generally to save skins, for opposition and for the government's welfareism, and especially universal basic income scheme, and supported by so many Nobel Prize economists. So how do we tackle that, and how do we bring that into mainstream discussion, whether it is good or bad?
See, there is a book called Utopia. And there, the Archbishop of Canterbury is supposed to be walking. And some character in that book is supposed to ask him, how do we get rid of petty crimes? And he says, we should think about giving income, basic income to people. It is a sort of a negative taxation. Whether you pay taxes or not, that is separate. But you should also, universally, you should get. And this is what Arvind Subramanian has written in the Economic Survey in 2017. And he himself has quoted Mahatma Gandhi, who has said that such a scheme would be absolutely unacceptable. To Mahatma Gandhi. Now today, accepting Mahatma Gandhi becomes a very big problem for all of us. So even for Arvind Subramanian, it became a very big problem and a challenge. The point I'm saying is that universal income scheme is always been debated by several people in our country. It has now become a mainstream debate also. And they expect that I will give you 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees per head to 130 crore people. So per month, it will be 1,30,000 crore, 130,000 crores. So you have to understand 1.3 lakh crores. That will be the amount. I don't know where from we are going to get the money, who will fund it, what will happen. Nobody has debated. Simply everybody wants to join and say, and that is why there is a debate by various economists with President Truman. So whenever he used to say something, they will also say, yeah, brilliantly put president, but on the other hand. So they will always say, excellent president on the other hand. Wonderful idea president on the other hand. So he said, I don't want dual-handed economists. I want single-handed economists. So I don't want economists who will say on the other hand. But unfortunately, who will fund this? Where from the money will come? What will be the bill? Nobody is able to look into it.
People are willing to believe that. Sorry, please go ahead.
It was debated in the economic survey of 2017, and I have in my chapter titled In Search of Utopia, I dealt extensively with UBI.
One of the leading opposition politicians has said they have figured out how to pay. They know how to fund this also.
No, I have no issues about funding UBI, but I have also issues. But I have issues with certain people who say I should not only have a right to work, I have a right not to work. So that is my problem.
So I think another component people are asking is how, for economic growth and for robust, sustainable economic growth, the regulatory structures of India for the last 70 years have been very weak. Now, one important case that you've taken up, getting the RBI and others under purview of investigation, that seems to be very, very, very critical for the next few years. What is its status, and what else can we do to bring better regulation into picture?
To answer the first question first, the moment I filed it, the second wave started. And unfortunately, we could not press the Supreme Court. And it is actually a petition filed by Honorable Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, Dr. Subramanian Swamy. So I have only assisted him in drafting it. So the courts are opening tomorrow. So my sense is that hopefully they will bring it on record. It's a very serious one, as you said, that in this country there are scams after scams after scams in banks, and RBI virtually is the alter ego of bank management. It takes returns on a daily basis, weekly basis, fortnightly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis, half-yearly basis, yearly basis, biannual basis. We counted somewhere around 242 returns, information given in this format to the Reserve Bank. But like MGR movies, in MGR movies, MGR will have a small mole here. He will enter the villain den, thrash them and all, then he will remove the mole. Then people ask him, Nia, as if they didn't realize. Okay, like that, the RBI, after every scam is over, somebody flies to London, somebody flies to other countries and all. Then only they realize, oh, there is a scam. We didn't know about this. When they are sitting on the bank as director, their representatives are directors in the bank. They have so much of information. They are in the credit monitoring committee for large advances. You must understand, whenever there is a large advance given by banks, they have to necessarily involve the RBI person. RBI comes and audits various banks. RBI comes and looks into various corporates also from different angles. All information is there with them. But when a scam happens, like a policeman in a Hindi movie, koi hilla nahi, last scene they will come and say. So these fellows will come and say this, what is that order they pass? You can't accept deposits, you can't give credit, freezing orders. So they give a freezing order, koi hilla nahi, at the fag end. So our petition is that RBI must also be investigated, at least in 10 major scams that we have listed, and said RBI's role in these 10 scams must be looked into. When they are looked into by CBI, let it be looked by CBI. Otherwise, EOW is there, let that be done by EOW, no problem. But CBI first must look into RBI's, this petition is not against RBI. This petition is against CBI primarily, that you start with assuming bank officers to be in fault, you start assuming entrepreneurs to be at fault. But what is the role of RBI officials? That is the main challenge for them. I hope something will come up. Let us see. Karmani Vadikarasya. We have done our duty. Let Supreme Court do it. What was the second part of the question?
No. What other regulatory structure should be created for growth? Yeah.
See, my view is, if you bring all these regulators, with due respects, I will say, SEBI is now headed by an IAS officer who has never purchased a share or sold a share. He doesn't understand stock market. He has never come for IPO. Suddenly you make him as, it is like making me the Pope. I don't understand Christianity. What do I do there as singing, making me as a Pope? I don't know anything. So I will just try to do some tamasha and get away. Unfortunately, this belief that IRDA, SEBI, luckily they have not made an IAS officer president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and say that you must review the regulator and you must also write accounting standards. So if we tend to believe in domain experts and give it to domain experts, I think things will be far better. That is how regulatory measures can come in. You must develop capacities. You cannot simply like that bring in people who don't understand markets as the market regulator.
So I'll just ask one last question to close.
Yeah.
A lot of people are asking what books would you suggest for people to read? But that's not a question, that is a request. On behalf of a lot of people, I apologize, we are not able to ask many other questions. But just as a closing on a philosophical note, who's accountable for a change in this country? Not just economic, not just changes to constitution or regulatory. How do we bring it to a common man's debate?
I am responsible, sir. All of us are responsible, as simple as that. And as far as the book I will recommend is my own book, because that is a selfish one, I can do it. Rest I can, whosoever is there, they can always contact me. I will definitely tell you what are all the books to read. But by reading books, I think you will tend to either agree with the author or you will tend to disagree with the author. What is more important is that we must get into a mood of setting our minds think. That is more important from a book second. A book that allows you to think is far more important than a book that gives you a definitive idea about a particular thing. So I would only like to read books that makes you think. And I can give you a list of it. And whichever discipline we can have a list and we can start looking at it. And usually I read a lot about the book by the review, by Wikipedia, by various sources before I buy a book, and then start reading it in small measures. So you don't read in one gulp. So you read it in slowly, you spread over even sometimes 6 months, 8 months, and read it in different moods so that you assimilate a lot of things.
I think very well. There's a lot of other questions, but I will leave it to Mr. Giridhar to take it over. Thank you so much on my behalf at least, and we'll leave it to Mr. Giridhar to take it up, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Srinivas Garu. Thanks a lot for moderating that, and it was wonderful. The way you consolidated and presented it. I think that's good. MR, one book, if I may add my one penny wisdom onto that, is everybody should read, being a Bharatiya, everybody should read Kautilya's Arthashastra. Sadly, we talk about Angus Madison, we talk about Keynes, we talk about so many guys, but we don't even attempt to read the Kautilya's Arthashastra. Whether we like it, we agree with him, we have differences, fine, but at least let us read it. Probably that's it. I'll just hand it over to my colleague, our treasurer, Vijay Thotapalli, to propose a vote of thanks. But friends, coming Saturday evening again at 6 o'clock, we're going to have Sushant Sareen ji talking on the serious headache that we have in our neighborhood, which is Pakistan. A lot of changes are happening there. So we're going to have another exciting session with Sushant Sareen ji next Saturday. So stay tuned and we'll send you the details. And now I would hand it over to Vijay for proposing the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Giri. Thank you, Mr. Venkatesh, for your excellent presentation. I hope we'll be in touch in our next deliberations on Artha Yagna platform. I thank all the participants, being with us for so long and, keen to listen to the presentation. And I also apologize on behalf of Pragna Bharati for not taking many questions because of paucity of time. We will definitely, you write to us or, write to Giri or me or Niranjana Charigaru. So we'll pool that and try to, get back to you within a short period of time or answering all your questions. I thank all participants again and see you soon. Thank you very much. Jai Hind, Namaskar. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you all very much. And thanks a lot, MRG. And, we'll have you back soon.